My name is Alex. I've always been fascinated by the dark web, not the ordinary internet where people post pictures of their cats or share vacation photos, but the hidden unindexed parts of the web, the parts you need a special browser to access, the parts where anonymity is king and where you can find things that would make most people's skin crawl. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, I decided to dive into the depths of the dark web once again. It was a guilty pleasure of mine, a way to disconnect from the mundanity of everyday life. I'd never done anything illegal. I just liked to browse, to see what was out there. Curiosity, I suppose. This night was different, though. I found myself on a forum I'd never seen before. The layout was simple, almost archaic, with dark, ominous colors and an eerie silence to it. As I scrolled through the threads, one caught my eye. Custom Hitman services, discreet and professional. I clicked on it out of morbid curiosity. The post detailed a service where you could hire a professional to take care of your problems. It listed prices, procedures, and even had reviews from satisfied customers. I knew this was the kind of thing that could get me into serious trouble, but I was fascinated. Who would actually hire a hitman? And why? As I read through the thread, I felt a chill run down my spine. This was real, too real. I decided I'd seen enough and closed the browser, shutting down my computer for the night. As I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed a line. I tried to convince myself that it was just harmless curiosity, but the unease lingered. The next day, I went about my routine, but something felt off. It was like a shadow looming over my every move. I chalked it up to an overactive imagination, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. That evening, I received an anonymous email. The subject line read, "We saw you." My heart skipped a beat as I opened it. The message was brief and chilling. "You shouldn't have looked. Now you're part of the game." Panic set in. Who were they? What game? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a prank, someone trying to scare me. But the paranoia was relentless. I checked all the locks on my doors and windows before going to bed, but sleep eluded me. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. I noticed a black car parked down the street from my apartment, always there, always empty. I'd catch glimpses of a figure watching me from a distance, but they would disappear before I could get a good look. My phone would ring with no one on the other end, just silence. One night, as I was returning home from work, I felt a presence behind me. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding. I reached my apartment building and glanced back, but there was no one there. Shaking, I went inside and double-locked the door. My paranoia had reached a fever pitch. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, unable to focus on anything. My work suffered, my relationships strained. I was unraveling. I knew I needed help, but who could I turn to? The police wouldn't believe me. I didn't even know who was after me. One night, I received another email. This time it contained a single photo of me taken from behind as I walked to work. The message read, "We are closer than you think." I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. I needed to get out of town, to disappear. But how? I had no plan, no resources. In desperation, I contacted an old friend, Mark, who lived in another state. I told him I needed a place to stay for a while, that it was an emergency. He agreed without hesitation. The next day, I packed a bag and left my apartment, avoiding the black car and taking a series of convoluted routes to lose anyone who might be following me. I boarded a bus, my heart racing the entire journey. When I arrived at Mark's place, I felt a brief sense of relief. He welcomed me in, no questions asked. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe I could outrun this. Maybe I could be safe. But the relief was short-lived. That night, as I lay in bed, my phone buzzed with a new email. I opened it with trembling hands. It was a video taken from outside Mark's house. The camera zoomed in on the window, on me. "We know where you are." Fear gripped me like a vice. I couldn't stay at Mark's place. I was putting him in danger. I explained everything to him, or at least as much as I could without sounding completely insane. He was understandably skeptical but agreed to help me. We devised a plan to throw them off my trail. I would leave Mark's house and head to a motel on the outskirts of town, while he would make it look like I was still staying with him. It was a flimsy plan, but it was all we had. I left that night under the cover of darkness. The motel was seedy and run down, but it offered anonymity. I paid in cash and used a fake name. I tried to rest, but every noise, every shadow put me on edge. I was running on adrenaline and fear. The next morning, I woke to the sound of someone pounding on my door. My heart leapt into my throat. I grabbed the small knife I had brought with me and approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Room service," came the muffled reply. I hadn't ordered room service. I looked through the peephole and saw a man in a hotel uniform, but something felt off. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. Suddenly, the door burst open, and the man lunged at me. I swung the knife wildly, catching him on the arm. He recoiled, and I took the opportunity to bolt from the room. I ran down the hall, hearing footsteps behind me. I burst out into the parking lot and saw the black car from before. It was them. I ran across the lot, dodging between cars, trying to lose them. My lungs burned, my legs felt like lead, but I couldn't stop. I spotted a wooded area behind the motel and made a beeline for it. The trees offered some cover, but I knew they were still behind me. I stumbled through the underbrush, branches scratching my face and arms. I could hear them getting closer, their footsteps crunching on the leaves. I tripped over a root and went down hard, the wind knocked out of me. I lay there, gasping, waiting for the end. But then I heard something. A voice, not theirs, but someone else's. A hiker, perhaps. I forced myself to get up and followed the sound, praying for a miracle. I burst through the trees and nearly collided with a man in hiking gear. He looked at me, startled. "Are you okay?" he asked, seeing the panic in my eyes. "No," I gasped. "People are after me. Please, help me." He nodded, understanding the urgency in my voice. He led me to his campsite, where his friends were waiting. They looked at me with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Call the police," the man said to one of his friends, who quickly pulled out his phone. As we waited, I kept glancing back at the woods, expecting my pursuers to burst through at any moment. But they didn't. Minutes later, the police arrived, and I told them everything about the dark web, the emails, the hitman. The officers took me to the station, and I gave a full statement. They assured me they would investigate, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. I was just another paranoid person in a long line of bizarre cases. But they did take my claim seriously enough to put me in protective custody. They traced the emails and found that they had originated from multiple locations, all dead ends. The black car was nowhere to be found, and there was no sign of the man who had attacked me at the motel. I stayed in protective custody for several weeks, moving from safe house to safe house. Gradually, the paranoia began to fade, though it never completely left me. I couldn't go back to my old life. Too much had changed. Instead, I relocated, changed my name, and tried to start anew. Even now, I still look over my shoulder, still jump at shadows. The dark web had shown me a side of the world I could never unsee. I had been hunted, but I had survived, and I would never forget the lesson I had learned, that some curiosities are better left unsatisfied. Days turned into weeks, and the black car seemed to vanish. I tried to convince myself that I had imagined it, that it was just my paranoia resurfacing. But deep down, I knew better. One evening, as I was browsing the internet, I stumbled upon an article about the dark web. It detailed various criminal activities and mentioned that law enforcement had been cracking down on illegal services, including hitmen for hire. My heart raced as I read the article. What if the hitman who had been hired to target me was now being pursued by the authorities? The thought brought a mix of relief and dread. If they were being hunted, it might explain why they had backed off. But it also meant that they were still out there, possibly desperate and more dangerous than ever. I decided to dig deeper, using what I had learned from my previous dark web excursions. I found a few forums discussing the recent crackdowns and rumors about hitmen going underground. One user in particular caught my attention. They claimed to have insider information and were posting about a hitman who had been forced to flee after their network was compromised. I messaged the user, hoping for more details. Hours later, they responded. Their message was cryptic but clear. The hunter has become the hunted. Stay vigilant. The next few weeks were a blur of anxiety and paranoia. Every shadow, every unfamiliar face set me on edge. I took different routes to work, changed my routines, and rarely left my apartment at night. But the feeling of being watched never left me. One night, as I was returning home, I felt a familiar presence. The black car was parked down the street. Panic surged through me. I couldn't go home. I needed to lose them. I turned and walked in the opposite direction, heading towards a busy part of town. The streets were crowded, offering some comfort in numbers. I ducked into a cafe, hoping to blend in. As I sat at a table, pretending to browse the menu, I saw him. The man who had attacked me at the motel. He was scanning the crowd, his eyes sharp and focused. My heart pounded in my chest. I couldn't let him see me. I slipped out the back entrance and ran, weaving through the alleyways. I could hear his footsteps behind me, growing closer. I needed to hide, to find a place to make a stand. I spotted an abandoned building and darted inside. The darkness enveloped me, and I crouched behind a pile of rubble, trying to steady my breathing. The footsteps grew louder and then stopped. He was here, searching for me. The silence was deafening. I gripped the knife I had kept with me since that night at the motel, ready to defend myself. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, every muscle tense. Then I heard it, a faint whisper, so close it made my skin crawl. "You can't hide forever, Alex." His voice was cold and menacing. I felt a surge of adrenaline and decided to make my move. I come out from my hiding spot, knife in hand, and stood opposite to him. He was caught off guard, but unlike before, he was better prepared. I watch as he moves his arm behind his back and pulls out a gun. I try to keep an emotion-free face, but I knew I had no way of winning like this. Everything slowed down as I watched him raise his gun and point it at my head. I won't die without a fight, I thought to myself. "Mark, now!" I shouted. Thankfully, he fell for the bait as he suddenly glanced around. I jumped forward and quickly tackled him. His weapon slid along the floor. It was fight or flight, and I was choosing fight. We traded punches, one hit after the other, both of us fighting with everything we had. But things took a turn. I was unmatched. I may have landed my fair share, but he was trained, skilled, and despite my effort, I had no chance. I was on the ground, tired and beat. He grabbed his gun once again and pointed it. "This is it, Alex. You lose. The game is over." I close my eyes and cry to myself as my life flashes. Then the sound of a gunshot fills the room. I heard a shout. The police had arrived. I open my eyes and see the man's body fall to the ground as he groaned in pain. The officers stormed the entire area, asking me if I was okay as they cuffed the man. The man was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including attempted murder. The police had been investigating the Hitman network for months, and my encounter had helped them capture one of their most wanted targets. I was placed back in protective custody, but this time, the threat felt less immediate. The network had been severely crippled, and the remaining members were being hunted down. I stayed in contact with Mark, who had been a constant source of support throughout the ordeal. Gradually, I began to rebuild my life once more. The nightmares and paranoia lingered, but they were manageable. I moved to a new city, changed my appearance, and started fresh. The dark web had shown me a side of the world I could never unsee, but it had also taught me the value of vigilance and resilience. Even now, I still look over my shoulder, still jump at shadows. The memory of being hunted is a scar that will never fully heal. But I am determined to live my life, to find peace despite the darkness that once consumed me. The dark web had almost destroyed me, but it had also revealed a strength I never knew I had. And with that strength, I faced the future with cautious hope, knowing that some curiosities are better left unsatisfied, and some shadows are best left in the dark.